just say thank you so much for being a part of this interview. Friday is the International Day for Human Trafficking, and it's such an important time for us to reiterate the importance to really talk about these issues. And hearing what you've had to say and your advocacy, giving athletes a voice, it's so crucial in a time like this when people, especially men, wouldn't want to come out to say anything. So I give you kudos for what you're doing. It's really amazing, truly amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So from us from Mission 18, I really appreciate you being part of this interview. So I'm going to start my first question, which is going to be more of a generic question, which is, what motivated you to take part in competitive sports?
Well, it was a very interesting situation. I was a teenager, very young, and everything happened quickly. And so I found it as a way to improve myself and change my lifestyle. I was told that the Olympics would be the way to riches and to have a better life than where I was living. So I bought the whole thing wholeheartedly, and I really believed that. And so I think that's really one of the reasons. I grew up in a very small farm town in Ohio, and as I started diving and competing, I started traveling the world. So I was able to see everything in a different view than just reading about it in books and hearing other people talk about it. I was experiencing it. And I think that's another reason that made me continue in the sport.
Yeah, great. And, because following your advocacy on, sexual abuse in sports and all of that, one would say, since touching is part of sports, how can a person tell the difference between a good and a bad touch? Because it's all part of sports. You have to touch each other. So
Absolutely. I think that's a really great question, and it's one that is going to have to be explored for a long time. I do know that in the sport of diving, touching was like a requirement, basically. The coaches were always placing their hands on us to push us in the correct position and guiding our bodies and manipulating our bodies. So it became normalized. And I think that's one of the things I think athletes have to be careful about, is that being touched in a certain way, a certain place, is not normal. And our internal instincts really tell us that. I can remember the time when the coach touched me in an inappropriate place on the pool deck, and I knew that wasn't right. But I kind of ignored it and went on saying that this is what he does and this is what it's about. So get over it. And so I think it's about that dialogue that we are basically taught and adapted to within the sports confines, that this is normal, and it's not.
So can you then briefly describe to us the sexual abuse you experienced as a young athlete?
Yes. While I was diving and shooting for the Olympics, a lawyer approached my mother and sort of like told her that the only way that I could continue competing is if he helped with the finances. And so my mother believed that. And so she basically handed me over to the lawyer. And so the lawyer, what he did was introduce me to all these professionals who were also going to help. And in lieu, what would happen is that they would take care of my family. So if there was a doctor's appointment or a medication that my sister or brother had to have, that was taken care of, as long as I fulfilled the obligation that they had set up. And then this lawyer approached my diving coach and offered him more money if he would pay more attention to me. And so then that is where the abuse with the coach started. So it was this whole manipulation. And so the whole trafficking aspect was within the sponsors, where they were taking me and dropping me off to the next one, to the next one, to the next one.
Sounds like a bit of grooming there, and
yes.
Fine, grooming, and what are some of the examples you can give around this? Because some of the things you've described here, it falls in line with this sort of grooming.
Correct. Well, I want to make sure that I state first that we are all groomed to a certain extent. Since the day we were born, we're groomed by our parents, we're groomed by the schools, teachers, coaches, society, government. Everybody's telling us what and how to do things. And if we want to be successful, we find a way to adapt to those situations. In my situation, my mother was groomed first. So when the lawyer approached my mother, he worked with her and groomed her to get her to believe that this was the only way that we could go.
Mm,
And before they even approached me, and the same with the coach. The coach became my mom's friend first, invited over to dinner at the house, continually to bring them back into the, the group, into the family. So it was that whole aspect. And then what happened is that the coach started asking my other teammates questions about me. What is he
mm,
like? What kind of music does he listen to? What is he afraid of? And so
mm,
he gathered all this information so that he could start using it with me. And then he started pulling me aside away from my teammates and telling me that my teammates will not understand because I was going to go to the Canadian Cup. I was going to the Norway Cup. I started competing internationally, and my teammates weren't. So that was one of the things that happened. And I
mm.
think I lost you. There you are. And so
Yeah.
that's the way it all started. And so it created this isolation within the team. And then he started to tell me that he was the only one that understood exactly what I went through because I don't know if you know the story of Dr. Strauss at Ohio State University. He was manipulated by Dr. Strauss, and he
Mm.
took me to Dr. Strauss. So then it
Oh,
was this constant returning back and forth. So he
yeah.
was an abused person himself. So this is like the kind of cycle that keeps going.
Yeah, so I mean, you've basically, what's so interesting about what you said is how every other person around you was kind of involved in the grooming process, and that's quite
Right.
interesting. Can you really describe the typical steps from grooming to abuse? Because you've actually touched it. Actually, you've touched on some of this question about us, but how does it move from grooming to abuse to PTSD once the abuse stops? How does that fall for a victim?
Well, I think you got a double question going on there because you got to look at it from the predator's viewpoint and then the victim's viewpoint. The predator believes, each predator attempts and grooms completely different. It's as
Yeah.
unique as the person they are. And they also will change the way they approach a child based on how the child is. I mean, they're constantly changing their approach. So it's really difficult to actually see and understand what the predator's motivations are, except what the final end result is, and that is to get the pleasure that they want at the cost of whatever it takes to get there. I also want to make sure you understand that the grooming happens over a period of time. It's not just something that happened in 3 days. The way that this coach worked with me was over months, slowly leaving a hand on the shoulder, slowly guiding me to a certain position, working with me, leaning in and whispering in my ear, telling me things that he knew that I needed to hear. And this was all after he and the lawyer had already groomed my mother. So what
Mm.
happens is that it's not, and another thing that's very interesting is that grooming does not always have to lead to sexual abuse. But yet the mental anguish and the mental um, effects of grooming are already set there. So
Mm.
that is a manipulation that's really needs to be looked at too. So in my case, he groomed me over months. He got my trust, and I really believed him. I felt that this was the only way I was going to be able to go to the university or go to the Olympics was through him. And when then his abuse started, when he would take me away on trips, sort of like to the university to practice with the university team, and he would tell me how important I was, and then he would drive with me and then put a hand on my thigh and keep it there, and this starts to evolve and grows and it gets closer to him. And then he used alcohol. He introduced me to alcohol. And so then we would have a couple of drinks and then things would happen. The next morning he would pretend didn't know what it was. Well, he couldn't remember any of it. And so I must have made it up in my mind. And so it was this constant game in a way to be played. And so in the PTSD didn't really affect me until later in life when I started to teach high school and I was working with kids that were at the age that I was when all this abuse happened. And that's when I started to really experience it. So there's that long period that a lot of people really um, seem to think that it never really happened.
Wow. I mean, I have to say, really brave of you to, to speak out today. And it's really, I feel like it's giving a lot of people that confidence, and to also take the same steps, because we're not hearing people's stories. People are experiencing this, and we're not hearing them. But most especially when they are males, when they are men or boys. So why is there more of a stigma around males talking about sexual abuse? Why do you think? Because we hear a lot about women, but it's
Right.
so harder for men to come out, or boys to talk about their experiences. Why do you think?
Well, I like to call it masculine anxiety. And I think that stems by how our society sets us up as men, as boys, and how we are not supposed to be manipulated. We're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to be able to fight back. And the whole myth that males cannot be sexually abused or raped, and we believe that. And if something does happen, then we were not man enough to
Mm,
protect ourselves. And so
absolutely.
it creates all that. And then it also brings up the whole question of what's your sexual orientation? If this happened to you, you must be a certain way. And that's not true. I don't think predators really think of it as who they're focusing on. It's whoever attracts them. It could be a male, it could be a female. They don't, I think they're not really aware of that. And it just brings up so many questions. And I think we're afraid because of the way society reacts. And as we have seen so many times, how certain governments will not support males. Our patriarchal society has this whole belief that we have to be a certain way. And I believe that there are certain countries like England and Australia and even Canada who are so much further advanced than the United States in this area. US is still resistant to even believe that males can be sexually abused, and that's the way it is. And I think that's why men are afraid to speak up. And in sports, we were afraid to speak up because we would lose our place in line to go to the Olympics or to represent our country, because there were five other people right behind us who could replace us so easily. And so it was
Wow.
a constant battle of threats and telling us what we had to believe. So we did, and if I bring up Simone Biles, what she's done in the last 2 days by saying no more, I can't do this right now. Mentally, I'm not aware or able to do this. What a voice that is for everyone,
Absolutely.
because we don't have to stand with this anymore. And I think the
Absolutely.
more men speak up and share their stories, the more we're going to start realizing that sex abuse does not care about gender or race or social economics. It happens everywhere.
Absolutely. I think that's really powerful, Jamaica. That's really, really powerful, because, even within what we do, we're constantly looking at and trying to advocate against trafficking of male and females from poor countries to Western countries. And we've seen a lot of victims from Africa, especially in South America. And just to think back at the cultural, the patriarchy, the cultural patriarchy ideology that exists in in those continents, which is a strong black male cannot be seen as vulnerable. And to hear you say, talk about all the different elements, the mental health issues, the competition, and all of this just contributes to in making this even bigger than it should be for men and boys. And so, but to you, what should a person do if they're currently experiencing sexual abuse? What would you advise them to do right now?
I would definitely say get help, seek out, call a hotline and you can call hotlines anonymously. I mean, you don't have to give your identity to right away, but you need to find resources in your area that you can go and get the help you need. Because if you don't, it does come back on you later in life. It will somehow, as in my story, I didn't experience all these things that everyone talks about till later because I completely denied them and ignored them and everything. And then it just becomes too big, kind of like what we saw, what is happening to Simone Biles right now. She can't handle it. All that stuff, that stress and everything comes out. And it's interesting because I think we need to realize that we are human, every one of us, and we're vulnerable. We cannot sustain the secrets that we think we can handle, and it eats at us, and it triggers us. There are things that will trigger you throughout your whole life that if you don't get the help you need, you will be triggered again. So I think you need to go and find help. Like Army Survivors is a great place to get resources. Um, the Athlete Silence is another place to get resources. But find those resources and talk to somebody. And if you're not ready to share your story publicly with your name attached, you can share it anonymously, and they will give you information on where to go and what to do and help you through this. I really suggest try to get professional help.
So, I mean, I think that's really powerful and encouraging, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are going to watch this video and wondering, this is happening to me. What do I do about this? And really, thanks to you, John Michael, for lending your voice and actually being brave enough to share your story and actually advocating through the athlete's voice. I hope and pray it gets to millions of people who really need this help. Thank you so much for today, for lending us your voice today. Mission 89 is very grateful, and we hope that through this video, through this interview, we can help many people, especially boys and males who find it difficult to actually report. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate this.
Thank you very much.